So we got a really interesting question from one of our listeners.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, someone was asking, about caste determination in India.
Yeah, okay.
Its history and, whether it's still around today. So that's what this whole deep dive is going to be.
Fascinating topic for sure.
Yeah, and we've got some really great material to, go through.
Okay.
And, yeah, the goal, I guess, is to, give you a solid understanding of this part of Indian society, how it started, and what it means today.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, so to start off, I guess, one of the big things about understanding caste in India is this whole history of, social hierarchy.
Right from the very beginning, it's all about this hierarchical social organization.
Yeah.
And a lot of the ancient texts describe these four main categories.
Okay.
They were called varnas. And you can think of these as kind of broad societal orders.
Okay, like levels.
Yeah, exactly, like levels. So there were the Brahmins,
Okay.
who were traditionally the priests and scholars, and then you had the Kshatriyas, the warriors and rulers. Then there were the Vaishyas, usually merchants and artisans, and finally the Shudras.
Okay.
They were the ones involved in labor and service jobs.
Gotcha.
And then beyond even this structure, there were groups that were considered outside the Varna system.
Really?
Yeah, they were often referred to as Dalits.
So it's even more complex than just those four levels.
Right. It wasn't a simple system.
So basically, it wasn't just some loose social order.
No.
It was a pretty strict hierarchy, right? Where you were born pretty much determined your whole place in society.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really important because this system traditionally shaped not only your social standing, but also things like your profession.
Oh, wow.
Who you could marry.
Wow.
Even your everyday social interactions.
It's your whole life was pretty much decided for you.
In many ways, yes.
That's kind of wild.
And the historical caste system was really deeply connected to religious beliefs and practices, too.
Oh, I see.
Which, gave it this huge social acceptance and staying power for centuries.
So it wasn't just a social class thing like we might think of it, in other places.
Right. It was much more all-encompassing and often unavoidable framework you were born into.
So then what about today? The listeners specifically ask if it's still a thing.
Yeah.
It's not legally in force anymore, is it?
No, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
Independent India, with its constitution, explicitly prohibited discrimination based on caste.
Oh.
And there have been a ton of laws and policies put in place to try and correct the historical injustices and promote equality for everyone.
So that's good, at least.
Definitely, but the social reality, I think, presents a little bit more of a complex picture.
So it's legally gone, but socially.
Still present, yeah, in some ways.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. I think overt discrimination has definitely decreased.
Okay.
And you see more interactions across caste lines these days.
But that historical legacy of caste, it still has this influence on social relationships.
I see.
Particularly in rural areas.
Okay.
And it can still be a factor in things like decisions about marriage.
Really?
And unfortunately, instances of prejudice and discrimination based on caste still do occur.
That's so sad.
It is. It's a really complex issue.
Yeah, and I think that's where this whole idea of determination gets really interesting.
Yeah. How so?
Well, historically, your caste was just determined by, who you were born to, right?
Exactly.
But even though that legal structure is gone now,
right.
Does that historical link still affect people's, opportunities?
Yes, really, yeah. The historical disadvantages that certain caste groups experienced, they've led to ongoing socioeconomic disparities.
That makes sense.
There is social mobility happening, for sure.
Okay.
And things are changing, but caste can still, unfortunately, play a role in things like access to education, employment, and other really vital resources.
It's it's hard to completely escape that past.
It can be. And, India actually has these affirmative action policies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're known as reservations.
Oh, okay.
And they aim to address these historical imbalances.
Okay, how do they work?
Well, they reserve a certain percentage of seats in education and government jobs.
Oh, wow.
For specific caste groups.
So it's trying to give them a boost.
Exactly. It's an attempt to level the playing field. But these policies themselves are actually part of a huge ongoing discussion and debate in India.
It sounds like it's a really complicated situation with no easy answers.
It really is.
So I guess, what does all this tell us about trying to understand India today?
It's a great question.
It seems like you can't really grasp the social dynamics there without understanding this whole history of caste.
I completely agree.
Even though things are so much more complex now and constantly changing.
Right. And the material we're looking at really prompts us to consider both that historical structure and its present-day relevance. And what's really fascinating to me is this contrast between the legal principles of equality,
Right.
and these deeply rooted social
It's
realities.
like a clash between what should be and what is.
Exactly. And the conversation around caste in India today is very active.
Okay.
There are continuous efforts being made to dismantle discrimination
Uh-huh.
and build a truly equitable society.
That's good to hear.
It is. And this whole thing actually brings up a really important question for all of us, I think, about how societies grapple with and overcome, these long-standing social hierarchies.
It's a question that a lot of countries are probably dealing with in different ways.
You're absolutely right. It's a global issue.
So to kind of sum up what we've talked about,
Sure.
the caste system has these deep historical roots in India,
Right.
and it traditionally shaped not only social status, but also like so many aspects of people's lives.
Hmm.
But even though it was legally abolished when India became independent, its social and economic effects are still something that people talk about and study today.
Yeah, it's a really powerful example of how these historical social frameworks can persist and keep evolving.
For sure. And it makes you think about,
What?
like how deeply ingrained these things can be.
Exactly. And it leads to a final thought I want to leave you with.
Okay.
Just consider this.
Yeah.
The really profound way that these historical social structures can endure and even transform,
Yeah.
even when laws and societal norms are changing.
It's like they have a life of their own almost.
In a way, they do.
Huh.
So I want you to think about this. What are some similar examples in other societies around the world
Okay.
where historical social stratifications, these divisions,
Yeah.
continue to have an impact on people's lives despite formal changes in laws?
It's like history is never really that far behind us.
That's a great way to put it.
It's always there lurking in the background.
It really is, and it's something we all need to be aware of and think about critically.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
thanks for bringing up that question.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
See ya!
Bye.